Conversion is where we are in our 5-step journey. We've talked about the last, which is consecration, and that's kind of the destination. That's kind of where we're going, is into deepening levels of yieldedness, surrender, devotion, consecration. The journey to get there usually goes through our cravings, a crisis, or many consequences, many. And those can bring us, because the crisis and the consequences can bring us to Christ. And when we come to Christ, like Jacob, we wake up spiritually. We wake up. So Jacob, he's on the run. He's on his way to Paddan Aram, and he stops in an area called, on his way for Haran, and he stops in a place. It's just night. There's nothing special about this place. It's dark. He can't travel anymore. So he gets a rock for a pillow. Kind of interesting notion, I suppose. Just wanted his head up a little bit. Lays down and has a dream and sees a staircase, a ladder come down from heaven, and angels descending and ascending on the ladder, the stairway. And at the top is the Lord. And the Lord speaks to Jacob. And the Lord reaffirms the promise of Abraham, Isaac, and now Jacob. Let me read it for you. He says, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land which you are lying. You're lying on it right now. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and will spread out over the west and the east and the north and to the south. All people of the earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Wow. Jacob wakes up and he's like, whoa, what just happened? That was awesome. And he had a combination of awe and fear, because he sensed God's presence and his purposes speaking to him. Remember, I said earlier that Jacob had heard about God. He believed in God, but he had never had his own encounter with God. This is the encounter, and it leaves him awestruck. And it leaves him so moved that he makes a vow to the Lord. This is Jacob's conversion. When you and I have a conversion experience, it is always a response to God's presence and his provision, what he has revealed and what he has done. His presence and provision. So when God reveals something, it's often something about who he is. He always wants us to discover something about who he is so we can experience who he is, right? He wants it to move from just an informational gathering to an experiential gathering. He wants us to know him. And when we know him, we are always brought to a greater insight about what he wants to provide for us. God's telling Jacob, this blessing that I gave to your father and your grandfather is now yours, and I will be with you. I will go with you. I will watch over you. I'll make your descendants as the stars of the heavens, the dust of the earth. Powerful. What's interesting, as Jacob responds to God's unconditional blessing, unconditional commitment, Jacob gives a very conditional response. Tells God, if you do all these things, then I will, I'll worship you. I'll build you a house, because this is surely the house of God where I am. This is the gate of heaven. He's saying there must be something special about this place. Truth is, this place is going to become known not as a place of great worship, but a great apostasy. It's going to become a place where people are constantly trying to manipulate, like Jacob did. It's going to be a very Bethel, house of God. It's going to become a prominent place throughout the biblical narrative, but it's not going to be the place of purity. It's not going to be the place of blessing, but actually of division. Why? Because Jacob wants to make it about him. I'm going to build you a house. I'm going to give you a tenth. He's still self-obsessed. So conversion has happened, but he's still self-obsessed. Here's, maybe you don't haven't realized this. You can meet Jesus and still have a lot of cravings. You can meet Jesus and still have a lot of cravings that have not yet met Jesus. The process is not only to meet Jesus, but let Jesus meet your cravings, overcome your cravings, purify your cravings. Jacob isn't there yet. He's had conversion, but he hasn't had consecration. When you and I are in our journey, it's always a journey of increased awareness to the things about ourselves that interfere with God's presence and his provision, with the revelation of who he is and what he wants to do. It's always a process and a journey of purification of our motivations. We learn to manage our motives. We learn to purify our appetites, cravings. And as we do, God blesses us. It increases our access to God's blessings that will come to us and flow through us. Today, can I just encourage you, let that conversion experience bring you to a greater level of consecration. Jesus, we ask, God, that we would all recognize that the sweet space is where heaven and earth meet. Jesus is the ladder. Lord, thank you for the Gospel of John, the last verse in the first chapter. Jesus says to Nathanael that he's going to see the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man, on the Son of God, because Jesus is the ladder to God. Jesus has come down to us so we can come up to him. Work in our lives today, Lord, to find Jesus as our all in all. Lord, that we would build on him as our foundation, that we would walk in him as our way, that we would conform to Jesus as our example, that we would rest in him as our high priest, that we would obey him as our king. Let Jesus be our all in all. I look forward to seeing you this weekend. Invite someone to come to church this week. Looking forward just to seeing you and us together experiencing God's blessing in greater ways as we receive from him and then give out because of him. Blessings.